So I want to talk to you today a little bit about where we're going in this legislative session that's coming up, where we intend to go in terms of our next steps in growing what I think will be a transformational opportunity in creating a new liquefied natural gas industry in British Columbia, and talk a little bit about the things that make us strong and that bring us together. But it has been, looking back for a moment, quite an eventful summer. Some of the events better than others. One of them that wasn't good at all was what happened to the folks in Likely with the tailing pond failure and the impact that that had on the community there and on the entire province of British Columbia and on the very important mining industry that so many people depend on to support their families. We had a summer where parents and kids were wondering when they were going to be able to get back to school. A business community that was wondering, and I think still is, what we're going to do and how we're going to create and continue to grow the economy after the Silkwoteen decision was rendered by the Supreme Court of Canada. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of those things and the things that I think tie them together in terms of leadership. But my experience in government really is this. Government is working well when we have a plan and we stick to our guns in executing against that plan. And that is incredibly hard to do. Government's a $45 billion operation annually. It's big, it's complicated, it's driven by a lot of different needs and different demands that it needs to satisfy. So it's hard to get there. But my experience in life is that everything is hard. It is hard to create a plan. It's hard to execute on a plan, and it's hard to stick to a plan. And the reason governments and businesses and anybody gets distracted is because when you are distracted, it's easy, because you're not having to stick to your plan, and sticking to your plan is hard. And that is a major problem in politics. Political leaders always looking to see what's going to be popular, what's going to be easy, finding distractions, and forgetting about sticking to the knitting. A plan is about making sure that you exert iron discipline about trying to get toward your goal. You communicate what your goal is to everybody that works with you, and you work with them to identify their role in pushing that ball forward until you get to that final destination. That is really hard. And I am not talking to people who don't know what hard looks like, because every single one of you that's grown a business or participated in growing a business has had to do exactly that. And it's very easy for people from the outside, your organization or mine, to say, well, we're not getting there quick enough, or maybe we should be doing something else. Well, in May, we set, in the last election, we set before the people of British Columbia a plan, and we said we were going to stick to it, and they endorsed it. So we are not going to get distracted. We are going to stick with the plan. That is a plan that means we are going to support the resource economy in our province. We are going to grow British Columbia jobs. We are going to focus on international trade. We are going to build a workforce that is second to none, and we are going to create a future for our kids, the equal of what our parents and grandparents created for us, bar none. The story of two leaders in the gold rush days in early 1860s. One was the head of an American militia, a group of Americans that was here to protect the American gold miners who were rushing up the Fraser River, and the story of a First Nations chief who was trying to defend what he felt was his people's right to be safe and sound and thrive in the community that was now being so affected by all the American settlers. And it was called the Fraser Canyon War. On one side was Chief Spintlem, and on the other side was Captain Snyder. There was an incredible amount of conflict that happened as contact got closer. People were fighting, people were dying, bodies were showing up in the river. And they decided at one point that they were going to have it out, an all-out conflict. And in the end, Captain Snyder, the chief of the Americans, looked around and he said, you know what? I don't have enough people. We are going to get wiped out. And he persuaded all of his militia that were following him that they should seek peace. They arrived at the place where they thought the conflict was going to happen, and what a surprise. Chief Spintlam had come to exactly the same conclusion. Not because he believed he was going to be wiped out then, but because he knew that if he created a conflict with these American visitors, more of them would come, and eventually his way of life would be wiped out forever. Two men, in the face of opposition from all the people that they led, decided to choose peace. And they changed the course of British Columbia history forever, because if they had had a conflict, make no mistake, the Americans who were massing at the border would have had an easy excuse to come into Canada, and they probably would never have left. And we would not be talking about Canada from sea to sea. It would be Canada from sea to maybe the Rockies. And today, or in November, we wouldn't be voting for people to run in Canadian elections, municipal elections. We'd be voting to send congressmen to Washington, D.C. And I raise that story because for me, it's an example of the difference that leadership makes. The difference that individuals can make when they choose a future purposefully, based on what they think is the right thing to do. Not the easy thing to do, the right thing to do. And Captain Snyder and Chief Spintlam could never have known the long-term impact of those decisions that they made. And neither can we. Neither can we. Every day when we make decisions, we cannot know exactly the long-term impact of those decisions, which is precisely why we need to make our decisions based on what we think is the right thing to do, not the easy thing, the hard thing, the one that's going to benefit generations of people to come in British Columbia. So here we are today, dealing with some unexpected bumps in that road. We have a plan, we're sticking to it, but some things have happened that mean we need to think about taking some new and unexpected paths. But think about how we can take those forks in the road and still end up at the destination that we want to get to. A growing economy, more jobs, greater wealth for future generations. And that is one of the opportunities that I see in one of the unexpected events. And that's the decision that the Supreme Court rendered in the Silkwoteen decision. After that decision was rendered, I sat down with Chief Roger William and the 5 other chiefs from the Silkwoteen First Nation. And after 30 years of fighting us in court and finally winning, despite many, many people saying they didn't have a hope, they sat down and played the part, I would say, of very gracious winners. They said, look, the Supreme Court has said there is title. Unique piece of land, unique so far in British Columbia, where we, as a First Nation, have clear title. But we know we need to work together to enable economic growth on that piece of land. We know we cannot and should not do this by ourselves. So we sat down with the Silkwoteen, and for the first time in history, a premier, I went up to visit the first title land ever declared in Canada, and we signed a memorandum of understanding that will allow us to work towards solutions on how we will govern that land. But the next step is thinking about how we want to work with First Nations more broadly around British Columbia, because the Supreme Court has very clearly changed the landscape. I called together 400 First Nations leaders to the Hotel Vancouver. We sat down for an historic meeting of chiefs with the cabinet. We spent the entire day talking about the issues that face them. And 2 things that came out of that were absolutely clear. The first is this: the solutions that we will need to find to work with First Nations cannot come from government alone. They need to be formed in partnership with First Nations. We need to come to a common understanding of how we will deal with one another, and it needs to be done jointly. The second thing was this. First Nations across British Columbia are hungry for economic development. They are hungry for growth. They want to be a part of resource development in the regions where they live. One chief at the meeting said this: a poor British Columbian, whether they're a poor First Nations British Columbian or a poor non-Aboriginal British Columbian, is not good for anyone. We should be working to make sure that every single person, whatever their origin, has an equal shot to thrive, seek wealth, provide for their family, and live in a community that they love and feel safe in. So we are beginning to work together with First Nations and making sure that we are going down this fork in the road together, but ensuring that as we go down that new road, it every day continues to get us closer to our ultimate destination, which is a bigger economy in British Columbia. And that's what I mean, too, when I talk about partnership. We have to work together if we want this to work. That's what we did with the teachers' union. At the very beginning of the disagreement, I said, we are going to get to a negotiated settlement here, folks. 30 years of not getting along is no excuse not to get there this time. And so we decided with focus and determination that we were going to get, for the first time in a long time, a long-term negotiated settlement. And we got there. We got there because of the leadership in the teachers' union side with Jim Eicher, leadership on our side with Peter Fassbender, and all of the people that worked on our negotiating team. And the prize in this is not just that it's affordable, and it is. It's not just that it gives teachers a fair raise, and it does. It's that for the first time in a long time, we've called a truce with the teachers' union. And it means we can sit down together and talk about that thing that we almost never get a chance to discuss because we're always bargaining. We're always talking about money and wages and working conditions. For the first time, we are going to have 5 years ahead of us where we can talk about kids. 5 years where we can build trust, where we can get to know one another, and we can create a whole different kind of relationship, where we can create the kind of education system that our kids are going to need if they want to succeed. Another area of partnership I wanted to talk to you about today is the partnership that British Columbians have with the mining industry, because it's a business that's so important for our entire province. So many people, including Will Westerling, depend on mining to succeed in order to provide for their families. But mining is a business today that requires some trust to be built or to be rebuilt. We have to do this because, as I said, we do depend on mining, and we need the business to succeed. And I know we all wish we could turn back time and that the events that likely had never occurred, but we can't do that. It's not the world that we live in. I went up there and I talked to the community. I walked with them in a healing ceremony, non-Aboriginal and Aboriginal together. And they talked about how they depend on that mine for their survival as a community. But they also talked about how they depend on that mine to protect their environment as well. And so our job in government is to find out exactly what happened, because frankly, we still don't understand what was the root cause of the tailing pond failure. And we have a job to do to make sure, in understanding that, we can ensure that it doesn't happen again. Independent investigation and inquiry. We'll hear from the experts at the end of January, and they'll talk about ways to prevent it. But business has responsibilities in this too. Business has the responsibility to live up to the highest standards, there's no question about that, but also to tell the story of mining and how important it is, how it's at the root of the way we've built our province. So much of our wealth is premised on the mining industry and the wealth that it's created here. You do answer to your shareholders, but if you're in the resource business, increasingly, you answer to all British Columbians, because they are shareholders in that social license that the resource business needs to thrive and survive. We depend on them to build wealth. We depend on you to build wealth. We need to do it together. We have a job ahead of us, but I know that if we tell the story of mining together, we can rebuild the trust that's been lost for British Columbia. And last on this point, I'd like to add this, because there is a partnership that has existed between rural and urban British Columbia for a long time. And Captain Snyder and Chief Spintlam, their experience speaks to that. Because what were they fighting about? Gold. Captain Snyder wanted to take it out, and Chief Spintlam wanted to stop that. But not stop all of it from going out. His view was, don't stop mining, just leave some of it for us so we can look after our people. Interesting, isn't it, how that debate still happens today. But that work, all that wealth that was created along the Fraser River all those 150 years ago, that is still the wealth that sustains so many people in this big metropolitan, cosmopolitan city. Not just this one, but all of the other cities that surround us. And so a quick reminder before I leave this topic, municipal elections are underway. And it is very easy in politics to run against something, to say what you don't like. It is very easy in politics to say you're just not going to let it happen. But urban politicians, just like rural ones already know, need to remember that the wealth that the mining business creates, the wealth that forestry creates, the wealth that the liquefied natural gas business will create is what's going to keep taxes down in Burnaby. It's what's going to make it possible for us to have the highest standard of living that we enjoy in Vancouver today. I was at a municipal leaders conference, and they had a sign that said, without natural resources, we'd all be naked. And I don't know how many of you would like to see all the municipal politicians in the Lower Mainland naked. But I think they should remember, and each of us has a job to do in educating our children, our family, our friends, about how important it is that municipal politicians stand up for economic growth. I see the mayor of Squamish here today. Squamish is a community that is going to be the host of multiple economic development proposals. And this mayor has worked tirelessly to attract that activity to his community because he wants to create wealth. I believe that municipal politicians that have the courage to stand up for that should be rewarded. And they will be if every single one of you decides you want to get involved and you want to elect the right kind of leaders in the communities where you live. So looking forward, Rich Coleman and Mike DeYoung and myself are going to be in this legislative session moving forward with legislation to bring to life our liquefied natural gas industry. It has to be clean, it has to be safe, and it has to be something that works for both sides. The people of British Columbia own that resource, and the people in this province want to see some return on that resource. Equally, the companies that are making the multi-billion-dollar investments in British Columbia want to see some return for their shareholders. So when it comes to partnerships, we have had an unprecedented amount of connection and communication in this business as we work to create the right competitive environment so that we can attract it to British Columbia. Natural gas is at low, low prices in North America, and those prices aren't likely to go up. Our choice is not between maintaining the jobs that we have and growing them by deciding to export it. Our choice is this. We can export this product by liquefying it, by making more of it and creating more jobs and making more money because it's worth more off the continent, or we can see hundreds and thousands of jobs disappear in British Columbia. because just about everybody on this continent is getting close to finding their own natural gas. And it's not the Americans that need it anymore. It's the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Indians. Those are the markets that we need to look to if we want to maintain the value of this resource and those jobs here in British Columbia. But if we are going to bring home this advantage, it is not just going to be by a competitive tax framework. It's going to be by making sure that British Columbians are ready to take on those jobs and that challenge, that we have a competitive, skilled, trained workforce that's ready to take on the task. Shirley Bond has been working incredibly hard, and I know she was here a few months ago to talk to you about it, to build a blueprint for jobs and skills training strategy that is going to serve us for the next 10 years, thinking about how we re-engineer our secondary and post-secondary systems so that we have the people that the businesses are going to need. More importantly, so that people are ready to take on fulfilling jobs that will mean they can change their own future. We're going to be bringing out our jobs plan, a long-term strategy. And you'll see it's a 3-year progress update. Small business, technology, manufacturing, Aboriginal people, First Nations, international trade. And for small business and manufacturing, Gordon Wilson, who's here today, is going to be a key part of that. Making sure that British Columbia businesses are part of this huge multinational investment that's coming to British Columbia so that we can amplify the economic impact of it to every region of the province. We need to make sure, though, as we're doing this, that we continue to be focused on growing our ties with Asia. I've done 5 trade missions since I've become Premier. Next week, I go on my 6th, and this one is to India. We'll be talking to them about LNG, about clean technology, international education, and we'll be talking to them about film and digital animation, building on the tremendously successful Indian Film Awards we hosted here just a few years ago. And we're going to India because of this. We had incredible success over 10 years ago in going to China and opening up those markets for British Columbia products. We are now the least dependent on our friends south of the border of any province in Canada, the most diversified in trading partners anywhere in this country because of the work that we did in working with China. We want to do exactly the same thing in the breathtaking transformation that's underway in India. The biggest middle class that humanity has ever seen is emerging in South Asia. And British Columbia needs to be there if we want to make sure we're creating jobs here at home. Our exports to India right now are $468 million. Compare that to China, $5.7 billion. Imagine if we can do in India what we did in China, and imagine the impact that will have on the British Columbia economy. So last, I want to talk to you about this, and that's trade barriers. All kinds of trade barriers. Trade in goods and in products, and labor mobility as well. Because some would have you believe that trading wine in Ontario is something like an international trade problem. It's not. We're all in the same country. But we have trade barriers between provinces that are so high, it's almost impossible to get over them. They stymie growth, they slow down job creation, and when Ontario closes its borders to BC wine, it's bad for BC, but it's bad for Ontario too. And we need to do everything we can to knock down those trade barriers between provinces so that Canada can stand proudly as one and make sure that we are doing the most that we can in our own internal market to maximize the value of wealth that's created here. So I've been working with all my fellow premiers on this, and on wine, we're getting there slowly but surely. Saskatchewan's going to open their borders to British Columbia wine. And increasingly, they can afford it with a booming economy, which is fantastic. Nova Scotia's got the legislation on the books and ready to go. Manitoba's already done it. We are working very hard with Alberta and think we're getting close. And Ontario and Quebec, we've heard some good early signs. I want British Columbia wine to be available to people all across this country, regardless of where they live. And talk about leading by example. Here in BC, we didn't say, we want you to do it, but we're not going to do it ourselves. We dropped all trade barriers to wine from across the country. We did it here first because we believe in free trade in Canada. But it's not just trade in goods, it's trade in labor, labor mobility. We just signed an agreement, for example, with New Brunswick that allows folks to be able to get their hours and accumulate their hours toward an apprenticeship in New Brunswick and then apply them here in British Columbia. We think that you should be able to get your education, get your hours to work toward a certification in a trade anywhere in this country, and then be able to pick up your tools and go anywhere else in this country and be able to go to work. There is nothing like the barriers to labor mobility to slow down an economy faster. And here in British Columbia, make no mistake, our jobs and skills blueprint is all about making sure that British Columbians have the skills that they need and are first in line to get the jobs of the future. It's our job to create economic growth and allow companies that are investing to create that opportunity. It's also our job to make sure that British Columbians have the skills that they need to take advantage of those opportunities. That's what the Jobs for Skills Blueprint is all about. But we also know that once we've done that, we are going to need people from across the country to come to our province and help us build this new industry in liquefied natural gas. And we know that once we've done that, we are going to need to look past our borders to bring new people in to British Columbia, some of them temporarily, and some of whom will stay. And so I want to make this comment about the discussion that we've been seeing in the context of the federal election that's unfolding, because I think the discussion has been tragically misdirected. I think playing politics with the issue of temporary foreign workers is something that leaders need to say something about. Because we should not think about people who come from across the world to British Columbia to work as being something less than the rest of us. Because that's how we got here. That's how Canada was built. By people who came from all over the world looking for a better life. So my advice to federal politicians is this: if you want to fix the temporary foreign workers program, maybe they should start with changing the name. Call them potential new Canadians, because they're coming here to help us build our country, shoulder to shoulder, working toward the same values and the same hopes for their children. And that's a better life. And that's what built Canada in the first place. So thank you very much for welcoming me back, Vancouver Board of Trade. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. And I know that none of you have shied away from hard work in your time, so you'll know that we have some very hard work ahead of us. I'm very much looking forward to continuing to work with you on ways that we can grow the economy and taking your advice about what we need to do to make Canada and British Columbia better. I look forward to seeing many of you on my trade mission next week when we go to India. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I know that together, because we believe in this country and we believe in making something better for our kids, that we are going to succeed. Thank you very much.